Hello,
Hello.
what's up? Welcome back to another episode of SG Explained.
After the Chinese New Year.
Yeah, we took a pretty long break, and that's fair because we were all celebrating family and even me. I was actually hanging out with a bunch of people.
That's cool.
But we're happy to be back.
Yeah.
I am actually just going to quickly share this on my own socials, as I normally do. And
Me too. I'm just gonna share it as well,
Yeah.
so that it reaches everyone.
But for those of you who are tuning in for the first time, well, welcome. There have been a number of things that have inspired us to do this, but most of it has to do with the fact that we are just genuinely curious about what makes us Singaporean, and we've been wanting to figure out how we can provide that narrative from a more research-based, fact-based angle. So what we do at this show is that we take a topic every 2 weeks and we dive into it, trying to understand exactly what was the context behind it, what are some of the perspectives around it, and actually, do we really know everything about it? So we've done some interesting things so far. We've done Singlish, we've done the pre-colonial history of Singapore, which would be interesting for those who want to read about bicentennial. We've done. What was your favorite episode so far, Willie?
I like dating.
Dating was definitely an interesting one. I was put on the spot. You asked me a lot of very curious questions. But today we're actually doing something that I thought was personally interesting. And actually, Willie, I didn't share this with you yet. But the reason why I chose today's topic, which is Pukul Habis, a military operation. Actually done by Malaysia and Indonesia. It's not a Singapore operation. It was a Malaysia and Indonesia operation. The reason why I chose it was because I was actually chatting with an older friend of mine, much older than you.
Oh, okay.
So really old by that definition.
Am I that old?
It's a joke. It's a joke. But basically, I was just chatting with him, and then I was telling him like, yeah, I served my military time, and then he just said, I'm so old that I served in Pukul Habis. And I was like, what is Pukul Habis? And he said, you don't know what Pukul Habis is? Oh, I have to educate you. And he gave me basically the play-by-play of what happened while he was, I think he just enrolled in university. That was the big thing. He just joined university. And before he knew it, he was called back to be part of the response to Pukul Habis.
Okay.
So as a young person, I felt like I had to go and do my research about this. Do you know about you didn't do Pukul Habis?
No, of course not. But definitely, when I was serving the military, you get snippets of stories about this thing. When I was in the military, I hear about this particular story, but we don't really know that the name was called Pukul Habis until I was out of the military already. Serving out of national full time,
right?
And then I start to hear about this, and people actually tell me this. Oh, I actually read it in the news,
right,
about such things.
So when it comes to Singapore's military narrative about why we need national service and why it's important that Singapore remain independent and all of this kind of stuff, Pukul Habis is actually one of the key events upon which, as you correctly mentioned, a lot of veterans and a lot of the old guard rely on as a part of the narrative, right? Because to them, like, look, Pukul Habis is a clear sign that there is indication of people like seeing the opportunity to use force against us. And so I thought it was worth jumping into it. It's a decently short explanation and episode, but I think it's juicy enough where we'll actually be learning a lot today.
Sure.
So. Yeah.
Of course. For those who are joining right in, yes, today's topic is about military war, or rather, an supposed what do you classify this? This is a military campaign, or what was this? A military exercise?
An exercise, yeah. So okay, why don't we jump into it? So
okay, sure.
Pukul Habis is basically the Malay word for total wipeout.
Okay.
Which in itself is quite a sinister name.
Yeah.
And what happened was that actually the whole operation took a couple of weeks, actually. But what happened was that on the 9th of August, is that a special day, Willie?
Yeah.
9th of August.
Of course.
What is it?
It's a National Day of Singapore.
Good that you know. on 9th of August 1991, what happened was that as part of this extended operation, there was a parachute drop just 20 kilometers north of Woodlands in Kota Tinggi.
Okay.
And basically, you have to imagine the context, right? It's 1991.
Right.
Actually, what had happened was that Goh Chok Tong had just taken over as prime minister. So this was his first year doing National Day as the newly elected prime minister. And given that context, having this parachute drop under the code name Total Wipeout in Malaysia was such a drastic series of events that basically Singapore had to respond. And so Singapore had to mobilize so many people in Singapore who are basically already within the national service framework and get them to come back and provide that deterrence and signal.
Sure. Maybe just to add as well that this, as much as there was a code name called Pulau Habis, there's actually Pukul Habis. There's actually an official military exercise name.
Yeah.
And it's called Melindo Darasa 3AB.
Yeah.
Right, which is actually a joint force between Malaysia and Indonesia. And Darasa actually means air, LNC, right?
Yeah, so Melindo is Malaysia, Indonesia. That's together. And then Darasa means SCNN. So it was essentially a 360-degree operation, really trying to enact total wipeout, or rather intending to indicate total wipeout. And all of this information is publicly known at this point, right? So it's declassified. The point of this exercise, Pukul Habis, as we'll call it, was to test the cooperation and response between the Malaysian and Indonesian armed forces. And this is the kicker. In case a neighboring country turns hostile against any one of those two countries.
Right.
So what they were basically saying was, look, we are just trying to test our capabilities as a joint force in case one of our neighbors turns hostile.
Okay.
Now, think about it. Malaysia and Indonesia, which neighbor would they possibly be working at? Especially knowing that the parachute drop was happening in Kota Tinggi, 20 kilometers north of Woodlands.
I mean, this is really hard to. I mean, of course, suggestively, where you would drop your military or have your exercise would be indicative of the proximity of where your potential enemy were or your potential threat were. But really, without declaring a specific threat, I mean, this is difficult to actually determine as well.
Yeah.
I suppose that there was a lot of consideration. But actually, I want to bring up something. It's just a realization. The word Melindo actually means Malaysia and Indonesia. So it brings about that airline, Melindo Air.
Oh, is that such an airline?
And then I was thinking, Melindo Air is actually Malaysia, Indonesia.
Oh, really? Okay.
So I'm just kind of curious. But Melindo Air.
I didn't know that Melindo Air was a thing.
Yeah, Melindo Air is. Let's just take a look. Yeah, Melindo Air. This is how it looks like.
Oh wow, that is interesting.
And interestingly, Melindo Air was also I think was it the parent company of Lion Air?
Oh,
yeah,
that's even more controversial.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, parent company to Lion. But anyway, I mean, it was mind blowing for me for a moment when you said that it was actually between Malaysia.
Yeah,
and Malaysia.
it was a very kitschy part of the whole operation that I thought was interesting. So before we dive into the actual operation, maybe it's important to get the context right. So exactly what was the overall series of events that maybe preceded this exercise, and exactly what did people think was happening before and after, right? And so I found on Quora, actually, this interesting excerpt from a book called Realism and Interdependence in Singapore's Foreign Policy. It's written by this person called Narayanan Ganesan. And basically, this exercise was happening amidst actually already existing tensions between Malaysia and Singapore. And what you'll realize is that some of these are not too unfamiliar, right? So what had happened was that bilateral ties had started becoming worse from 1988, so 3 years before this operation. And this happened because...
Were you already born? 1988?
No, dude.
Okay.
I was born 1993.
Okay.
But basically, the Malaysian government had announced the crippling of aspiring and the arrest of 7 persons in that aspiring, including 5 Malaysian military officers and 2 foreigners.
Oh, so you mean aspiring as in military?
Like espionage.
Espionage, I see.
Yeah. And so Malaysia basically said, we found aspiring. There were 5 Malaysian military officers and 2 foreigners, which was widely thought to indicate Singaporean nationals. So already there was some tension. Basically, Malaysia was saying, like, look, we know that you guys are spying on us. There were other bilateral ties, so one of which was Malaysian allegations of airspace violations of aircraft and helicopters. They reduced the low-flying area for Singapore military aircraft as a result of that. And there was also a cancellation of a joint naval exercise between Malaysia and Singapore. Okay, get the name of that. Malapura. So Malindo and Malapura. It seems like this is a recurring theme in how we do joint exercises.
Maybe that's how they,
I never knew this.
It was like their millennial terms in the past as well.
Yeah, so they canceled a joint naval exercise in Perak in 1990, and that all basically brought us to the point of this military exercise. So essentially, what was happening was that in 1990, Lee Kuan Yew stepped down and Goh Chok Tong took over as the prime minister, and he was supposed to represent the second generation of political leaders.
Okay.
Right. So during this time, the Malaysian government was led by Mahathir, and basically the widely accepted view was that Malaysians saw the Singapore leadership as untested and vulnerable, and this was a great opportunity to basically provoke some kind of response. That was what people were saying.
Of course, the alternate view is that I think this is from a Malaysian commentator, right? He explained that the Malaysian field exercise are driven by the availability of commercial agricultural land for exercise.
Yeah, so I saw that. Basically, the thing was that this exercise isn't new. This joint exercise happens quite annually.
Right.
And the time that it happens is also around this period. The exact day was, as you mentioned, chosen by the availability of commercial agriculture.
And of course, for viewers, the reason why this is a significant thing is because if you were to damage crops, actually you need to fork out a high amount of high compensation for damaged crops.
Yeah.
And at least that's what this was explained by the Malaysian counterpart or commentator on why they actually held that military exercise over that period of time.
Yeah. Do you think there would have been a big difference in how we look back at this if it had happened on 8th of August or 7th of August, or basically not exactly on 9th of August?
I'm not sure. I think what led to the fact that was that there was already rising tensions.
Right.
And of course, with that level of rising tensions, the next question would be like to place such an exercise in the middle of such challenging tensions. Right. I think it's to people on the receiving end, this would of course definitely feel like this was really a threat, a show of arms or something like this.
Right.
Yeah.
What I did read was that someone from the Malaysian administration eventually admitted that they could have been better timed with this.
Yeah, of course.
But that happened postscript, so you could also argue that of course you have to say that. If you don't say that, it sounds like you were relentless.
Of course. Yeah.
Yeah.
In retrospect, everything is.
Yeah.
It's truth, right? Yeah. So.
I mean, it's an interesting thing about the way military works, right? Because you have posturing, you have signaling, but then you also have, once an official says something, then you have to take that as your basis for acting upon.
Naturally, yeah.
Especially,
I suppose politics also means reading between the lines.
Yeah.
Yeah. So sometimes we can't outrightly say something, but we actually can mean many things as well at the same time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So in terms of numbers, what exactly was the situation looking like? from Malaysia and Indonesia side, there were 300 paratroopers who were mobilized. And this was an airborne assault in Kota Tinggi. And this included parachute drops as well as live firing. So that's the extent of what was happening. And on MINDEF's side, basically, we triggered a massive open mobilization. The way...
I mean, it's the Singapore Military of Defense, right?
Yeah.
Because I think they have their own MINDEF as well.
Oh, yeah. So our MINDEF triggered a massive open mobilization. And the way it was compared to was that normally you only see 4 call signs. Is it 4 on TV?
Or is it possibly. It just really depends on
what happened was that this was the first time that people in Singapore had seen more than the regular number of call signs being displayed. So instead of just 4, I think there were 6 that were displayed, and that was when everyone knew, like, okay, something's up.
Yep.
Because, like, you know, if it was just 4, then people would say, oh, it's a regular mobilization. But if it was 6, people were like, something's going on. And the people who were getting mobilized knew something was up because live ammo and new weapons were distributed. And even armor and artillery assets were deployed in the staging areas that they had prepared for.
Right.
So this was interesting because I remember the person I was talking to, he was telling me the play-by-play of, you know, how he came in and he was given a weapon and he was given live ammunition, and for the first time in his life he said, oh my god, I think I may be going to war, right? And he was telling himself, like, I was just starting university. Like, it's crazy to think that the people who lived through this, and they're still alive, actually thought that they could be going into battle, you know. So it's a very profound idea, I think, and I think it's something that a lot of us need to appreciate as a part of our history, that there's a generation that lived under very, very real and imminent threat.
Right.
Yeah.
Definitely. I mean, not just I mean, people receiving live ammunition and new weapons. I think some people really know it was up when they were actually mobilized to sit along the edges of the Malaysian railway in Tanjong Pagar with live ammo. I think that's a clear signal as to how they'll be viewing, like, what actually is up. That you could actually sort of like get clues of what I do. And I suppose soldiers were even planting live mines in Singapore. And you know that when you plant live mines, that's really a big deal.
Yeah. it's difficult to deactivate mines. I was a combat engineer. So,
right.
So I know that's difficult.
Definitely.
Yeah.
So with this whole mass of like live ammunition and hardware and new weapons, I think that a feel of imminence of going to war, and definitely hard. I mean, if I were to put myself in that situation, we'll be kind of freaked out, you know.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting to hear what the leadership said about this, right? So as I mentioned, it was like real people went through it, and so it wasn't difficult for people to start talking about it. But you know, when Lee Kuan Yew finally wrote about it in his book Hard Truths, he basically said, actually, I didn't think that Malaysia and Indonesia were trying to invade us. He said, quote, they wanted to intimidate us and con us so that we know our place at the bottom of the pecking order in the region. We need a study, sorry, they typo in the text. We need a sturdy, strong, and capable SAF, not only to defend Singapore, but return blow for blow when necessary. If we do not have the strong SAF, we are vulnerable to all kinds of pressures from both Malaysia and Indonesia.
Of course.
So that's word for word what Lee Kuan Yew said,
right?
Which is very interesting, I think, because it was happening in that time where Singapore. You would have thought that, you know, this was already 26 years after independence.
Okay.
Right, and you would have thought that basically at this point Singapore would have decided, Malaysia and Indonesia would have decided, okay, we're going to leave Singapore be. You know, 26 years since that whole saga of like separation and everything, like, you know, we're all evolving, we're all developing, and we're all just trying to do well. No, but apparently they still wanted to keep putting us in our place. And we'll connect this back to what's happening today. I think that's a big part of this as well. But it's it's a realization, I think, as a young person and my idealistic self, that hey, like actually there's a lot of just real military force going on, that at the end of the day it affects real people who have to get mobilized, who actually have to step up.
Definitely.
You know? So it's a very profound idea, as I've been reading this and hearing about this, I think. Yeah.
I see. Yeah, but I think in the minds of most people, we don't really hear about this news. We don't. I mean, growing up, this news is something that you don't exactly hear from my mom or my dad.
I'm curious why this wasn't part of our social studies.
Right.
Because I think this would be a very good, like, if you were to writing like, why is national service important? You can just say Pukul Habis. One line explains everything.
Right. I suppose because they are a perpetual neighbor, there could be some political concerns as well, diplomatic concerns. By publicizing such an area or or thinking that this is such significance, may I suppose create a divide between countries as well.
I mean, yeah, absolutely right.
Yeah.
I think a big part of it, as you correctly mentioned, is that it is not completely sure what Malaysia and Indonesia's intentions were.
Of course.
We can only analyze and make certain intelligent assumptions. But yeah, at the end of the day, Malaysia and Indonesia's position was we weren't trying to intimidate you. We were just doing our operation. Right. So you're absolutely right. To have it in such concrete form as like, this is why like we need to be savvy and all this kind of stuff. Yeah, it would be a more nuanced position.
I suppose many people would then come, and this would be the side of the episode where we're giving our own opinions. I suppose, I mean, some people could like, is this an overreaction to a military exercise, for example, or is this really an imminent threat that we need to that Singapore needs to address?
Right.
So I think this is largely very concerns, which is why playing up in the media may create certain truths or rather certain impressions that will be difficult to actually recall at the end of the day.
So yeah. I think the lesson that we can take away quite clearly is that there is a need for that sense of always being prepared to be mobilized and always being prepared to defend, because while that operation, we don't really know what the actual intention was, or maybe even the context of it, but what we do know is that if it was with Malaysia's intent, then it is even more important that we were ready. And I think that is the kind of thinking that we need. So regardless, as citizens, regardless of what our neighbors are doing, as people, can we ever say, we need to cut our defense spending, we need to be less defense reliant? Today's this last week, the budget was announced. Actually, it was just yesterday. And defense is one of the areas in which we're increasing our spending, right? And we're actually cutting spending in certain areas like trade and industry, right? But we're increasing spending on defense, and a lot of people are saying like, why are you doing that? Like, defense is basically just a very expensive insurance program that you're buying. And I'm starting to understand why. And I'm starting to understand, especially if you look at the context in which this was happening. Remember how I mentioned the cancellation of the joint naval exercise, the airspace issues, the transition in leadership. Those are things that are happening right now as well.
Of course.
Right? We're having those maritime disputes. We're having those airspace disputes. And I use disputes in a loose way. Like it also just could be the nature of negotiation, where we have disagreements and we have to come to some form of compromise. But it is important to recognize that sense of ongoing need to watch our borders and watch our defense, because I think that is going to be one of the defining features of how we move forward.
Yeah, definitely. I think definitely military is very key, especially for any nation to really exercise their sovereignty.
Yeah.
And I think it's only through your military might that you actually are able to act on that sovereignty as well. So it's very natural for, I suppose, even like a small country in Singapore to actually build up their military force to really secure its place in the world.
Well, absolutely. So if that's actually all I managed to find The thing is, I think there's a lot more, and as you rightly mentioned, a lot of it is still probably classified, a lot of it is unknown. So if you, listener, or viewer, were a part of this exercise, or you know stories from your dad, your granddad, do let us know, and email us, Facebook messages, and we'll mention those stories in one of our next episodes.
Sure, definitely. I think that maybe just as another thing that we could possibly extrapolate from this situation, especially for the from this entire military exercise, and how we actually can see the future of why right now there might be an increase in military spending especially for this budget.
Right.
It's simply because during that point of time, it was actually the transition of political will and political power within Singapore, right? Right. We were seeing like the transition between Lee Kuan Yew to Minister Goh Chok Tong at the point of time. It's just in that period, I suppose it was also a very sensitive time for Singapore. Really, the next baton being passed on, and seeing from this, the next question would be a test. Would it be a test for the next leader? The next political leader leading the country.
Right.
Correct? And so right now, the question would be this: as much as Singapore is considering the next phase of its political transition, or political leadership transition, would that same acting begin? Would that kind of pressure still be felt as well?
I mean, like I said just now, right? Some of the key ingredients are already in place. Quite interestingly, the same Malaysian leader is in place. That doesn't mean anything necessarily, but it'd be very, very ironic if it all played out in a very similar way. Just because of all the ingredients already being there.
I mean, will we really face another Pukul Habis?
Yeah,
that is something that I think that can we accept?
I mean, one could say that we've already experienced that. Not necessarily the same extent, but the fact that Malaysia has already extended the spot limits and already said, no, we're taking a hard line, this is what we want. That could be a demonstration of similar will. I mean, it's unilaterally Malaysia, but at the same time, that's one of the things that you could already see start happening.
Definitely. Yeah. I think whether it's airspace or what we call territorial waters, I think definitely everybody wants to act on their sovereignty.
Yeah.
What exactly is really theirs.
Right.
And I suppose the in order to claim that piece of land or claim that piece of sovereignty, really it's the device to use, apart from political dialogue, really is military might.
Yep.
Yeah. And I suppose that's why with the absence of this political or this option of military action, you'll find yourself actually losing ground and losing sovereignty.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So just to summarize as we wrap up this episode, it's a short episode, which is something that we've been trying to experiment with. But just to wrap up, I think bringing this back to what it means to be living in Singapore and to be identifying with that Singaporean narrative, I think it's important to realize that this event is actually quite a central piece of that military narrative. Okay. This is what a lot of people, both in and out of the military, will use as justification for why, like a real life justification. Like if any point you were to use, if you were to not be satisfied with political theory or even ideology, this is a real life event which people always say, look, this happened. This was how close we got. And this will be the reason why we never want to be in that vulnerable position.
Right.
So I think that is an important central note to what it means to be a Singaporean, like realizing that event has so much meaning in that narrative. So just thought this would be a cool way to connect with some of the stories of our
it's very apt time. I mean, we are facing exactly the same, very similar conditions as well.
Yeah.
Transition of political leadership.
Yeah.
We have also not just that, increasing budget, increasing our military spending.
Yeah.
Our neighbors also have a change in political leadership as well.
Yeah.
Recently, we have a lot of cases of, for example, intrusions into waters as well.
That tensions. Yeah.
Tensions into also airspace disputes.
Yeah.
I think right now there are some like growing tensions as we're seeing as well. And so these are things that definitely is something worth talking about.
Yeah, it's a good way to mirror, absolutely.
Yeah.
So, as we mentioned, if you have your own stories or you think that there's any special events that adds to that idea of the Singaporean narrative, then do share. We're always excited to hear from you. But otherwise, this was Willie and this was Rovik.
All right. Thanks for tuning in, guys.
See you.
See you in the next episode.